consistently, we have been having discussions about APFO, open and closed charts, capacity. All of those terms are inextricably linked and get blended together. Ms. Mallow very clearly defined the main driver in Policy 6010 is the issue of which this board advance was on capacity.
Where are we going to cut to add equity?
I already made my comment, which is if the obligations are between $50 and $60 million, our county revenue growth is around 30 million last year, then we're going to need to come together and figure out a solution that's going to really involve talking with the community about what we want to invest in.
Taxes and bonds. I'll just put it out there.
And from an operations standpoint, wait till we get new growth projections after the new impact fee, which I know we need, but we're going to get a whole nother set of growth projections, and they're going to be lower, and it's going to be that Apfo discussion again.
No, and it is a balancing act because
Yeah.
we don't want to raise it and then only have 2 nickels to rub together.
Ms. Young.
Well, I was just also going to mention the impact fee and the hope that that will make a difference in our budget and our ability to fund some of the capital requirements for the schools. It is, of course, directed specifically at the schools and is a long time coming. So just a little commercial for CB 42.
What do you have as a projected income for the impact fees? Because I've heard various
150 million over 15 years, wasn't that?
10 years.
It's over 10
10
years.
years,
So
I'm
it's
sorry,
about
over 10
15,
years, yeah.
it's about 15 million with post-APFO numbers. So even 15 million for capital, the capital budget is still, I mean, it's a bigger drop in the bucket, but it's still a drop in the bucket. And even looking at transfer and recordation, or maybe a way to reconfigure the sort of where the transfer tax goes, as Mr. Youngman has referenced, is still only going to be another drop in that bucket. None of these are $60 million one-year solutions, and that's the ultimate problem.
Dr. Wu.
So I have 2 questions. So one, first, like, if by other expected, we get $15 million extra per year, right? That'd be great. Does that mean 100% will go to school system, or?
Yes,
Okay.
100% will go
Okay.
to the school system. CB
Okay.
42.
Okay. That's good, right? If you look at the number, the capital, that means we can start building elementary school, right? 15.
Construction or also systemic renovations
Yeah,
and
sure,
maintenance,
sure.
right?
I just say that
'Cause
number
we
is-
are $500 million in the hole on that.
Renovation.
It goes to your
our capital-
bucket.
to our capital
It goes
budget.
to you.
Yeah.
So what you do with it,
But
but
not
it's
deferred
based off
maintenance.
of your growth.
Say that again, Ms. Young?
Not deferred maintenance.
Not?
No, I don't think the way the bill is written, I don't think it can go to deferred maintenance.
It doesn't just go to capital?
And renovation.
Well,
I'm
capital
sorry,
is-
building and renovation.
That's good enough, I feel.
Yeah, it will be, you're right.
We'll take
Yeah,
the
that's
15
good
million
enough.
anywhere we can get
We'll
it.
use it. I don't think you have
Oh,
to worry.
believe me, I want more money,
Good
yeah.
enough, yeah.
So the other point I want to make is the really CIP really tied to our housing types and the development, right? So I look at Ms. Walsh's post on Facebook. There are 2,000 units will come online in 3 years in Elk Ridge, right? And how do we deal with the overcoming capacity need from that development? I think the school and the county council and the county government need to work together, find a way to address that. Where do we put our new schools, right? We need to that should come to our mind all the time. Otherwise, we just keep catching up and never, there's a way we can catch up.
20 years of that.
Okay, Ms. Walsh, I think you were next.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. That is my concern, and we're in CIP discussion now, right? And so I'm looking at the latest list, I think, which looks, from someone coming from D1, very different than what it looked like 2 weeks ago. I don't see high school 14, although I do see Dunlogan Middle School. I don't see the Turf Valley Elementary School, whatever number that is now, 44. I'm right. I need it to have a number, and I need it to be in queue, but I am very, very worried about what I can see coming down the pipeline and the projections that I see that are based on how we project student yields. I think it comes back to what Mr. Youngman said, that we need to align how we're allocating housing at the council and and the DPZ level and how we're building and focusing our efforts coming from the Howard County Public Schools side, because there is always a disconnect, and the students that are hurt by that disconnect the most are the ones that are jam-packed where the development has been and honestly is not stopping in D1 for the immediate future. We will eventually run out of space and the pain is coming to a district near you. But right now, even in D1 with those numbers, especially the apartments, we can't keep up, and it does worry me. The philosophical point I wanted to ask on the capital budget in this latest iteration is this what we need to do, or this is what we think we can do, or some combination of that? Because, again, coming from D1, this is not what we need.
So I'm going to ask Scott and Dan Lubel to come to the table, but let me provide the philosophical piece, and that is a concern which has exacerbated all of this. We have a fully articulated 10-year CIP that addresses what you said, what we need. Then we go into the current year where we find ourselves right this moment in real time addressing the 3 projects of Hammond, Talbot, and the new high school with the amount of money of which we have been communicated that we have available to do that. So that is real time making decisions on balancing those projects to advance them forward. And you see in real time, I'm pushing out projects because we don't have the money in real time. But the 10-year CIP fully articulates what those needs are and closing some of those gaps where we're looking at those other projects of which you talked about. From that level, philosophical, we're balancing out needs versus real money. On that note, let me let Mr. Washington speak.
Good morning, Scott Washington, Acting Chief Operating Officer. And I think to your question, Ms. Washington, is actually a combination of both, of need and what we can do. Honestly speaking, if you looked at our previous CIP, which really had what we had projected, it showed a much larger number. We're not being told we're going to get anywhere close to that, so we had to basically go back and look at our CIP based on what we were told we would have in terms of growth of the funds, and have to basically make it work with the funds we have. With that being the case, projects were staggered. Even based on what the board proposed on Thursday, we did have a CIP that I think we had to pre-file on Friday at noon. Correct. There were some adjustments made with that, but again, even with that still, the numbers that are shown there are optimistic. At best. So with that being the case, it doesn't show our full need. It does show the plan that we put together based off what we were told we were getting, with the board's desire to put the high priority projects back in and then adjust it accordingly. Anything else to add to that, Dave? Okay.
Mr. Youngman.
Knowing that the new impact fee, call it $15 million a year, whatever it turns out to be, I think the way that you guys did the math was just kind of $15 million over 10 years gets you the $150 million. Right. How do we leverage that? Because if you look at those growth scenarios that we looked at during APFO and that we looked at earlier this year, you know, we're still doing this for like the next 10
years.
Maybe APFO pushes it out to 13 or 14 years, and then we level off. So figuring out a way to build a school in 12 years isn't really doing much for us. We should be, by then, just in hardcore renovations of their 50, 60-year-old buildings. How do we get the capacity now if we get you that income stream?
Well, I think before we even get to that point, I think it's 2 things, so correct me if I'm wrong. Number one, the impact fees is an estimate of $150 million over 10 years. That's an approximation, which means, number one, we don't have that. We're not guaranteed $15 million that first year.
Right.
That's one. Number two, because it hasn't gone forward yet, we don't know when we're going to get it. It would not have an immediate impact. Those are concerning. Number three, and this is where I think I have to make sure I'm correct, that affects capacity. Does not affect renovation.
Yeah, it's just
Okay, so it's
for
capacity. Okay, so that goes to our other issue, which we kind of talked about on Wednesday with our delegation, and that's the fact that, again, you do have ES 43, you do ES 44, you do have ES 45.
They're the long range.
Exactly, they're long range. But the bigger picture is kind of what you're saying in terms of the renovation. I think it was alluded to one time before. You know, I think pretty much we've built a number of schools, as you already know, from basically 1988, I'm going to say, to about 2003, we built 30. So we were bringing on anywhere from 1 to 4 schools a year during that 15-year period. Wow. So this is 2019, about to go turn 2020, which means those schools are now moving into middle age, which means now the Lime Kilns and the Fultons and the Hollyfield Stations, the Triadelphia Ridges, it seemed like we just built yesterday, are now over 20 years old. And now they become more of a renovation concern than a capacity concern. So your county is still growing for 10 years, so you still got to adjust that. You have your older buildings with the projects that we've had to push off, that has been duly noted and everybody has raised concerns about. And now you're going to start bringing those projects into, I like to almost call them middle age, where they're coming into the period where you're going to have to start dealing with them, as well as the fact that now they'll become eligible for renovation. We have to have those funds of support. So even if it's that $15 million that we're talking about a year, let's say best case, it's still a drop in the well. Because one of the things that's come up through all the discussions we've had with the public hearings and everything else is the priority projects, which are major. But again, you can't ignore systemic, and you can't ignore those items. That number adds another big number to our budget. So to make sure we're dealing with the capacity and with the systemic, to make sure we're doing a holistic look at our system, that's the concern we have. And that's where we need to look at not just the impact fee, but whatever we can work together with to have other streams of money are somehow coming in, because we're going to need those funds in the not too distant future.
Well,